Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Accessibility Talks, or ALI Talks, A11yTalks. We put on a monthly virtual meetup where we chat about digital accessibility, inclusivity, and usability. Each month, we invite a speaker to present a topic, and afterward, we invite you, the community, to ask questions and participate in the discussion. I'm today's host, Amy June Heinlein. I am the Certification Community Architect at the Linux Foundation, and I also sit on the CNCF, Cloud Native Computing Foundation's Deaf and Hard of Hearing Working Group. And I want to give a quick shout out that September is Deaf Awareness Month. But before we get into the talk, again, Deaf Awareness Month aims to increase public awareness of deaf issues, people, and culture, emphasizing the really positive aspects of deafness, encouraging social inclusion, and raising awareness of the organizations that happen locally, nationally, and globally that support those who are deaf. Which leads me into, we have live transcripts available, and that link will be in the YouTube chat, but feel free to enable the YouTube closed captions if that works better for you. I want to remind everyone that our group seeks to provide a friendly and safe environment. We require everyone who participates to adhere to the Accessibility Talks Code of Conduct. This includes speakers, hosts, those watching on YouTube, and folks commenting on our social networks. It applies to all of our community interactions and events, verbal questions, and chat in our text channels. And you can find our code of conduct at alitalks.com/conduct. And we really want all participants to be able to engage in productive dialogue and share and learn with each other in an atmosphere of mutual respect. We love when you ask us questions. So at the end of the presentation, we'll take some time for Q&A. If you have a question for our speaker during the talk, there are a couple of ways that you can ask. You can type your question into the YouTube chat window. If you parse it with put a Q in front of it, that helps us parse the questions along with the chat that's going on. And then on social media, you can use the hashtag A11yTalks, and that's Mastodon or Twitter. Huge shout out to Agile Collective for becoming a bronze sponsor of ALI Talks. We really appreciate all of the support. And a shout out to our AliCat Club members who donate monthly to ALI Talks, and to our one-time donors as well. We really appreciate the financial contributions. Do you want to sponsor and be recognized as a sponsor of ALI Talks and help fund these amazing monthly meetups? You can visit our sponsorship page at a11ytalks.com/sponsorship. Today, we have our very own Kat Shaw, lead engineer at Lillibot. She's going to present What the Heck is ARIA? A Beginner's Guide to ARIA for Accessibility. The floor is yours. But first, before I do that, I want to ask about Japan and gardening.
Yeah. I'm obsessed with gardening now. My mom used to garden when I was younger, and I loved it, but I didn't really get into it until I was a single mother, and I just started small. And I lived in Japan when I was 5 to 8 years old. And I loved it, of course. I really loved the cherry blossom trees and just everything about it. Very simplistic and minimalistic. So now I have my own garden out front, and I'm obsessed with a lot of different kinds of plants, local and drought tolerant, but I'm turning it to a Japanese garden. So that's been really fun. And we're working on Nawaki, which is like an outdoor bonsai, and also bonsai. I'm going to start trying to do that. So, yeah.
Cool. Do you compost?
I do.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. I love composting.
Yeah.
And everyone knows when I talk, when I host, I like to ask, what is on your music playlist today?
Oh gosh.
Yesterday?
Well, I've been listening to old school, like 70s rock for some reason. But it mellows me out when I'm working. So I've been listening to like Michael McDonald and just like Simon and Garfunkel and just all of that kind of stuff lately. So just all the stuff that my parents used to listen to. But I also love a lot of the new music. I'm really into alternative rock. It has always been my love of,
Fun.
so
Fun. Well,
yeah,
the floor is yours, Kat.
thank you. So welcome everyone to my talk, What the Heck is ARIA? A beginner's guide to ARIA for accessibility. So first, I just wanted you to please take note of the bit.ly link and the QR code on my slides. And I will also post a link to the slides on my LinkedIn account later. And it should also be posted in the YouTube chat as well. So this session is based on my 2019 Lullaby article with the same title. And this is my second time doing this presentation. I just did it a couple of weeks ago at Drupal GovCon in Washington, D.C. So the article, it's been viewed by many users over the years, and I believe it's for several reasons, including the confusion that surrounds ARIA. So still today, I share some of that confusion, imposter syndrome, if you know what I mean. So my goals for this presentation are to show how ARIA attributes bridge the gap to address accessibility issues that cannot be managed with native HTML, and explore what ARIA is, what it can do, when you should use it, and when you shouldn't use it. So I wanted to first say that there's going to be some pictures that have nothing to do with ARIA through this presentation, and I just wanted to kind of make light of it and just enjoy life. So this is a picture of me when I was, I think, 1.5 years old, with my somewhat impressive afro at that age. I can still do this if I do no brushing of my hair for maybe 3 days, which is amazing. It's every day is a different day with my hair. But I did want to start off with a quick intro about who I am, where I'm from, and where I work. So my name is Kat Shaw, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a short woman, 5'1", with a mix of brown and gray curly hair. I have an olive complexion, and I wear glasses. Right now I'm wearing a blue KU Jayhawks hat because I'm a big fan. Professionally, I am a lead engineer at Lullabot that specializes in digital accessibility and front-end development. I've been a web developer since 1999, and digital accessibility specialist. I've been that since 2005, a Drupal developer since 2012, and I've been CPACC certified in digital accessibility since 2017. You can find me on social media at Kat Ann Shaw. And so personally, I live in Perry, Kansas with my family, which is 15 minutes outside of Lawrence, Kansas, which is home of the Kansas Jayhawks, and 45 minutes outside of Kansas City, which is, of course, home of the Kansas City Chiefs, which I'm a fan of both teams. And I live in a rural community, and I love the space. So I want to go over what we'll cover in this talk, and this is my daughter, Maya, crazy, and you'll see a lot of great faces from her in this presentation. So I want to go over what we'll cover in this talk. These topics come directly from the article that it was based on. So first, we'll go over what is ARIA. So what does the term ARIA even mean, and what does it do? Where does ARIA come from? What are its origins, and who is managing it now? And next, we'll go over who is ARIA for, and how do people with disabilities use ARIA, and what kind of support is there for ARIA? We'll go over what can ARIA do. We'll discuss what it does and doesn't do, as well as speak about ARIA roles, states, and properties. When shouldn't you use ARIA? Here we'll talk about the 5 rules of ARIA use. When should I use ARIA? We'll go over some real-world examples of when you should use ARIA. How does Drupal use ARIA? We'll talk about how Drupal has incorporated accessibility and ARIA, including ARIA, into core and contributed modules with its accessibility policies and best practices. And what confusion is there on how, if, and when to use ARIA? In here, we'll finally discuss some confusion on common use cases, including buttons and landmark roles. First, I want to go over just some common accessibility terms that I'll mention during the talk. So A11y, that's ALI. That's accessibility with 11 letters in the middle. So A, and then the 11 letters in the middle, and then Y. Then there's WCAG, which is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and the current version is 2.2. Then there's WAI ARIA. I'm not actually sure exactly how you're supposed to pronounce it, so I just say WAI ARIA. That's the Web Accessibility Initiative, Accessible Rich Internet Applications. Then there's W3C, World Wide Web Consortium. They're an international community that develops web standards. Then there's AT, which is assistive technology, and that's screen readers, braille keyboards, switch devices, lots of other types of technologies. A screen reader is a device that's commonly used by blind and visually impaired users to describe what's on the screen. And finally, semantic HTML, which is native HTML, and that tells browsers and AT how to use websites and apps. Okay, so what is ARIA? What does the term ARIA even mean, and what does it do? Okay, so ARIA is shorthand for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. It's a set of attributes added to HTML elements. It defines ways to make content accessible to users of AT, which is, remember, assistive technologies. And it bridges gaps when ALI issues can't be managed with native HTML. What does the term ARIA even mean, and what does it do? Here we have some basic examples of a search form using the commonly used role equals search. This is different than the default role equals form, which is used for most forms. So the role equals search is used for search forms. And so that's very important that you specify that for search forms instead of role equals form. So what does the term ARIA even mean, and what does it do here? We have two basic examples of using the ARIA role attribute. By adding role equals alert, this message gets read aloud to screen reader users immediately. And by adding role equals status, the message gets read aloud to screen readers at the next opportunity. That doesn't interrupt the current task. Okay, so where does ARIA come from? What are its origins, and who's managing it now? It was first developed by the ARIA Working Group as part of W3C's Web Accessibility Initiative, or WAI. And the working draft was first published in September 26th of 2006. The current recommendation is the WAI ARIA 1.2, which was completed in March of 2014. And the next draft is in development, and that's the WAI ARIA 1.3. Who is ARIA for? And how do people with disabilities use ARIA, and what kind of support is there for ARIA? One of my favorite pictures, by the way, of Maya. So people with disabilities use the web using AT, or assistive technologies. That would include software and hardware that users use with like screen readers, screen magnification, screen recognition software, and then adaptive strategies like text resize and captions, techniques used by users with disabilities to assist with web interaction. And it could be just browser-based or software-based, mobile-based, a lot of things like slowing down mouse movement with motion reduction, captions, dark mode. There's a lot of different versions. And ARIA was specifically created for screen reader users and users who cannot use a mouse and must rely on their keyboard. ARIA gets added directly to the accessibility tree. So What kind of support is there for ARIA? ARIA is not supported by all technologies, but is always growing. And supporters include browsers, AT, applications, and JavaScript toolkits. Complete support is difficult to achieve because of its complexity. And most current technology supports some form of ARIA. And you can track its progress at the Power Mapper ARIA Support by User Agent site. ARIA and HTML5, I'd like to go over that. HTML5 doesn't have 100% browser and screen reader support. Because of this, it's very important to check the support status of the HTML5 elements that you're using. When HTML5 elements don't have full support, add both HTML5 and ARIA attributes to your code. And you can check those using the resources that are listed on the slide there. And they're all linked and you'll be able to see them later. So let's next go over what can ARIA do. Here we'll discuss what it does and doesn't do, as well as talk about ARIA roles, states, and properties. So first, what ARIA does and doesn't do, it does modify how content is presented to AT users in the accessibility tree, but it doesn't add functionality or behavior to an element, including JavaScript behavior, and it doesn't change an element structure in the DOM. Instead, it enhances it for AT. So you should review the WAI ARIA accessibility tree for more information on that. So when it comes to ARIA roles, and they're used to define a type of user interface or UI element. Once a role is set for an element, it does not change. And some the types of ARIA roles are abstract roles, document structure roles, landmark roles, and widget roles. So then some example roles would be, and I'm sure you've seen these before, would be role equals alert, role equals search, role equals document, role equals content info, which is what you'd see for like a sidebar or a footer. ARIA abstract roles, what are they? While acting as the foundation for all other roles, abstract roles are utilized by browsers and should not be used in code. Instead, they are used to give roles their meaning in context and help with the addition of new roles. And how does it get used by the user? Actually, abstract roles are in the background, so they shouldn't be adjusted. ARIA document structure roles, they provide descriptions for sections within a page, and they aren't normally interactive. Some commonly used examples would be the image, document, heading, list item, and toolbar. How does it get used by the user? They identify content while navigating through a page. This helps give the context of the content that they're taking in. And while HTML5 may provide much of this context on its own, screen reader support for HTML5 is sometimes missing, unfortunately. So for this reason, the most robust choice is to use both when you have issues with the support of the browser. So ARIA landmark roles, this is a pretty common role that people are familiar with. They're created for easier navigation, and they identify each section of a content within a page. So some commonly used examples would be banner, content info, form, main, navigation, and search. And how does this get used by the user? They navigate through the page using these landmark roles, and some examples would be a screen reader will announce the start and end of each landmark role set on a page, and its web rotor will display a list of these regions and roles. Web rotor, by the way, is a tool that is used on a screen reader where it pulls up a list of the different like links, headings, landmark roles on a page for a screen reader user to be able to navigate through a page. So they're very important. Okay, ARIA widget roles. There are two types of widget roles. There's standalone UIs and composite UI. So standalone UIs, widget roles, they add semantic meaning to elements in UIs, small and large. They're used when HTML doesn't define elements, and they're part of larger composite widgets. Commonly used examples are alert, button, checkbox, link, menu item, and tab panel. How do they get used by the user? Well, they interact with the page to get things done using them, and they can include completing forms, opening and closing tabs and panels, and navigating menus like a menu or a sidebar menu. With composite UIs, they also add semantic meaning to elements and UIs, small and large, but they act as containers that manage other contained widgets. Commonly used examples would be combo box, grid, list box, menu, radio group, and tab list. They get used by the user by interacting with the page to get things done, and they can also include completing forms, opening and closing tabs and panels, and navigating menus like a main or a sidebar menu. Okay, so let's go over states and properties for ARIA. You'll notice that I have two terms grouped together, states and properties. And this is because they're often grouped together in the WAI ARIA specification. So some similarities between the two are they have very similar features. They both give specific information about an object. They both form part of the definition of the nature of roles. They're both treated as ARIA prefixed markup attributes, which allow developers to modify an element's properties and states in the accessibility tree. And some differences are property values are less likely to change, and states values change frequently. So that's why there's the difference there. There are exceptions to the rule when it comes to those, though. An example would be the ARIA value text attribute, which defines the human readable alt text of an ARIA value now for a range widget. Both of these are commonly referred to as attributes by WI ARIA. So let's talk about ARIA drag and drop attributes. And what are they? They convey information to AT about drag and drop elements, and they include draggable elements and their drop targets. So commonly used examples would be an ARIA drop effect and ARIA grabbed. And they get used by the user to use drag and drop attributes to interact with drag and drop components using various methods regardless of their disability. Next up, we have live region attributes, and those indicate changes in content for the user's AT, such as setting whether a message will be read aloud with the flow of content, like ARIA live equals polite, or instead interrupting the flow of content, and they'll be read aloud immediately, which would be ARIA live equals assertive. These elements don't need to have focus, and they can include information on how the user can proceed. The commonly used examples here would be ARIA atomic, ARIA busy, and ARIA live. How does it get used by the user? It informs the user what's happening on the page with regular messages as things change on the page, and it provides notifications to users after forms have been submitted. Okay, now let's talk about relationship attributes. And these are really important in a lot of ways, especially with forms. So these add relationships between elements that can't be determined otherwise. Some commonly used examples are ARIA described and ARIA labeled by. And they get used by the user to understand when information is related when navigating the page, to gather additional information and data from various elements like forms and menus and tabs and panels. Okay, so next up, let's talk about widget attributes. What are they? They're used for common UI elements that receive input from users while processing those actions and information. Commonly used examples of these are ARIA checked, ARIA disabled, ARIA label, and ARIA required. These get used by the user to more easily utilize UI elements like forms and modals, and they help to avoid confusion during input process. Okay, that was a lot, and I'm very technical, so let's go over some examples of when you shouldn't use ARIA. So when shouldn't I use ARIA? That is a great question. It's funny you should ask, and here we're going to talk about the 5 rules of ARIA use. So the 5 rules of ARIA was created by the Web Platform Working Group, and it was created to provide guidance in answering this question. The W3C published them as part of the WAI ARIA specification, and let's go over the 5 rules now. So the first rule of ARIA, and the most important one, is to use native HTML at all times, unless it's absolutely, positively impossible to make an element accessible otherwise. So when in doubt, choose native HTML. Some examples of when this may not be possible include when the HTML5 element doesn't have an accessibility support. And you should always check that status. On the site here that I have included is an HTML5 accessibility site, and it's constantly being updated with whether or not the HTML5 element has accessibility support. If a design doesn't allow for a specific native element because of limitations on styling would be another example of when you might have to use it. And when the ARIA role or property isn't available natively in HTML5. Here you'd want to check the Paciello group's ARIA roles and properties not available in HTML5 site. Okay, the second rule of ARIA is do not change native HTML semantics unless you absolutely have to. So in almost all cases, native HTML will work just fine. ARIA does not get added to the DOM, or the document object model. It gets added beside it. So any objects created in the browser will not automatically become what they are trying to emulate. So for example, when creating a button, instead of using a span with role equals button and on click, you would want to actually use a button, an HTML button with type equals button, or type equals submit, and maybe an on click with a function, and then that will be an accessible button. Otherwise, a user cannot activate the submit button using standard keystrokes like a spacebar, making your application inaccessible. So the third rule of ARIA is all interactive ARIA controls must be keyboard accessible. So for elements that don't normally receive keyboard focus, you can add tab index equals 0 to the element to add it to the logical tab order, but you should never add a positive number to the tab index attribute, because doing so adds that element to the tab order, making the application accessible. Here's an example that I created for the host Amy June. So instead of adding a div tag with tab index equals 1 with Amy June is dull, which nobody thinks that Amy June is dull, you would want to add tab index equals 0, which will add it to the the structure, the tabbing order. If you add tab index equals 1, what happens is that it goes straight to that item and skips maybe the navigation, everything that's at the top of the page, and it confuses the user because it just jumps around the page, which is a big no-no. Okay, the fourth rule of ARIA is for all elements that are focusable, do not ever add role equals presentation or ARIA hidden equals true. That's because for some users, this results in them getting keyboard focus on elements they cannot access, causing confusion. And auto-focusable elements like links and form elements, that's what this is specifically for. Any element that has tab index 0 is also included in this list. And if we have this example of creating a disabled submit button. So instead of having a button with ARIA hidden equals true, you would add ARIA disabled equals true. Okay. The fifth rule of ARIA is you must give all interactive elements an accessible name. So this only happens when the interactive element's accessible name has a value. In this case, instead of with a span tag having like search value and then an input, you would add a label that has a for attribute with the value of search and that connects it with the input that has an ID of search. Or you could have an input that has an ARIA label equals search, which adds a visually hidden label for screen reader users. It's always best to have a visual label though versus a visually hidden label on the page so that all users can see the label for a form element. Okay, let's go over when should I use ARIA. Here's some real world examples of when you should. So descriptive labels, when you need to add more descriptive labels to HTML elements like buttons or links, like read more or learn more, you can add the ARIA labels like ARIA label or ARIA labeled by to accomplish this. So instead of like having a link with, path to your page and read more, you would want to add an ARIA label, read more about sustainable gardening, and have the href there and read more. So for when I was talking about the web rotor earlier for screen reader users, instead of them seeing a list of links that say read more, read more, read more, they'll see read more about sustainable gardening, read more about Japanese gardens. They'll see a specific unique list of links, which is more informative. Okay, live regions are for events to get announced to screen readers, and ARIA live regions must be added to those elements, and they help AT to detect and read aloud those changes. So instead of using a div tag with class equals alert message, which says it didn't work, sorry, you would use a div tag with a role equals alert, which then gets announced to the screen reader and read aloud. So relationships, to create a parent-child relationship between elements, you'd add an ARIA attributes to each element. So commonly used examples is ARIA labeled and by and ARIA described by. And in this example, I'm showing the relationship between an image and details elements using the ARIA details and ID pair. So image element, it contains a sunflower field. It has the ARIA details attribute, and the value of the ARIA details attribute is ID from the details element. For the details element, it contains a more meaningful description of the sunflower field image. It has an ID attribute, and the value of the ID attribute is equals ARIA details from the image element. So all of that actually helps to create relationships between the elements for screen reader users. Okay, so if we talk about forms, by adding ARIA, you're adding ARIA attributes to form elements to make forms accessible for users of screen readers, and it helps them to become easier to interact with. Commonly used examples with those are ARIA labeled by, ARIA labeled, ARIA autocomplete, and role equals search. So examples would be, again, the for attribute with first name for the label, and then connecting that with the ID for a form field, an input field. You'll notice on the input field, I also have required equals true, autocomplete equals given name, ARIA autocomplete equals inline. Okay, so how does Drupal even use ARIA? Let's go to another section. Next up, we'll talk about how Drupal, which is a content management system, and the best in my opinion, has incorporated accessibility, including ARIA, into core and its contributed modules with its accessibility policies and best practices. Thanks to the Accessibility Initiative that started with Drupal 7 and has continued to this day and beyond, there have been many advancements in both core and contributed modules to deliver an accessible experience to all Drupal users. So let's talk about some of the built-in modules and features of core and some of the contributed modules created specifically for accessibility. So RL alerts is in core, and they create consistent RL alerts that are provided via Drupal's Drupal announced JavaScript method. This allows blind users and users with visual disabilities who use AT to hear alerts on the page. So the two allowable values for the ARIA live attribute in this case that are used for alerts are polite, which will not interrupt the browser, and you should always default to this, and assertive, which will generally interrupt any current speech by the browser. Next up is a core module called inline form errors. It's one of my favorites. It adds form errors to Drupal core. They are now enabled by default, and you have to turn them off if you want, which to me is great news. This, when a user fills out a form, it adds a linked summary to the top of a form with the errors, and they're linked to the fields. And the inline error forms, the inline errors appear below each form as well. And not only do they appear below each form, they're red and they contain an icon next to each field, which is helpful for people that have color blindness. This helps users of AT to drill down on what form items to correct, and it makes it easier for all users to complete a form. Okay, so Core also has a tab order for keyboard accessibility. For keyboard only and screen reader users, tab order is a top priority. So with Drupal's tabbing manager, developers can add or remove tab constraints from a page using controlled tabbing order. And an example use case would be for modals, dialogues, and pop-up messages. Key elements in Twig templates automatically receive keyboard focus. And a common example would be the skip to main content link that goes to the main content of the page so that people can skip the main navigation. They don't have to listen to the main navigation on every single page. And another one is views. Several ARIA attributes can be added with the views module. A good example use case in this situation would be a meaningful label, adding it to a read more link. So here you can open a view, select a field, open the rewrite section, and add a bit of custom code like I have here, combined with tokens to create a descriptive label like this. So instead of read more, you'd have read more about, and then the title token. So that would show the title of the link. And then you have the link, and then you have the title within the link. And so that would say read more about gardening. Okay, next up I have themes and admin menu. So I'd like to just quickly talk about the Olivero and Claro themes, which are both added to core not too long ago. Also, the Drupal admin menu was recently added to core as well, and it's experimental. They all incorporated and tested for accessibility from the start, including with the National Federation of the Blind, or the NFD. And this included semantic HTML and the addition of ARIA only where necessary. This process resulted in a much improved experience for users of Drupal-based sites. So a contributed module that I like is called Block ARIA Landmark Roles. It adds additional elements to the block configuration forms and gives site builders the ability to add landmark roles to any block on the site. Okay, CK Editor abbreviation adds an abbreviation button to the toolbar of CK Editor, the rich text editor, or WYSIWYG. When users select the button, it creates an accessible abbreviation at the bottom or at the location of the user's cursor. This is important if you have actually WCAG. Let's say you have WCAG on your page, on your editor, and when people hover over it, it says Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Okay, next up would be text resize, which adds a text resize tool for users with low vision and a block, which would include obviously the two buttons of increased text size, which would be a plus button, and a decreased text size, which would be a minus button. Okay, let's go over what confusion is there on how, if, and when to use ARIA. So we'll finally discuss some confusion on common use cases, including buttons and landmark roles. So button versus link versus anchor. How can we tell which one to use? So with a button, it triggers an action on the current page with forms and search and playing videos and slideshows, and it's triggered using the keyboard spacebar. But with links, they trigger actions in different ways depending on the type of link you're adding. So with an internal link, it redirects users to different pages and documents on the same site. So that might be documents and content pages. With external links, they redirect users to another site or document. So that might be like a partner site or a PDF document or a video, like a YouTube video. And then you have anchor links, which redirect users to another section on the same page. And that's where you have like the skip to main content link or bookmarks or linked headings. And those are triggered by the keyboard's return or enter key. So the button is triggered by the keyboard spacebar, and that's why it's important to use native HTML whenever possible. Will adding role equals button to a div tag turn into a button? No, it will not. You should use semantic HTML when creating a button or any HTML element. Otherwise, the buttons or links will trigger inconsistently or may be inaccessible unless additional JavaScript is added, which is a pain in the you-know-what. So button activation, again, is done with the spacebar, and link and anchor activation is done with an enter and return selection. Redundant ARIA landmark roles. Using ARIA landmark roles and HTML5 elements together is now redundant and no longer necessary unless there is not support for that HTML5 element. So it was done back in the day for inconsistent coverage of landmark roles in HTML4. So now it's best practice to use the ARIA landmark roles. Now it's best practice to use the ARIA landmark roles for HTML4 and use the HTML5 elements as is with no ARIA landmark roles. So landmark roles are automatically detected with HTML5 elements. Here is a list of HTML5 elements and their paired HTML4 landmark roles. An example would be a role equals banner is equal to a header tag, or a role equals complementary is equal to an aside, which that corrects what I said earlier. A role equals content info is equal to a footer, and on and on. Okay, some confusion on using HTML5 and ARIA. One big area of confusion relates to the first rule of ARIA use. Use native HTML at all times unless it's absolutely positively impossible to make an element accessible otherwise. There's understandable confusion on when to use semantic HTML attributes versus ARIA attributes. Two common examples are HTML required versus WAI ARIA required, and HTML autocomplete versus WAI ARIA autocomplete. Luckily, there is now a W3C HTML accessibility task force that is addressing these issues as we speak. Here's an example from earlier that I mentioned with the label and the input with the ARIA required. And in this case, it's not necessary to use both if you're not supporting older browsers. See, the ARIA required used on a custom non-semantic elements that are required and contained in ARIA role, like role equals radio. And the required is used on semantic HTML form controls that are required. With the autocomplete versus ARIA autocomplete, in this case, it is necessary to use both because the autocomplete has a value of on or off or token list, and it autofills fields with values from user agents, which are browsers. So off, no suggestion is displayed when you turn it to off, which is the default. And on, when you use on, the browser decides what to autofill the field with. And the token list, when you add that, it lists adds a list of tokens to help users complete the field. The ARIA autocomplete, though, the possible values are none, inline, list, or both. And that informs the screen reader users on the type of autocomplete to be used. So that would be like combo box, search box, text box. And there you have none, inline, list, and both. Now, some say never use ARIA, and it's understandable that some feel this way, mostly because of the overuse of ARIA. However, according to the Paciello Group's own ARIA roles and properties not available in HTML5, several of them are needed to make the web easier to navigate and use for users of AT. Now, got the final slide here. The takeaway that I'd like to have you take from here is to stick with native HTML controls whenever possible, to use ARIA as a last resort when elements cannot be made accessible otherwise, and to remember that it's a balancing act. You've got this, and are you ready? Pun intended. So I'm ready for questions if you are. And this is another great picture of my daughter acting crazy.
I had a question, but you kind of answered it, but I want to ask again, just to get another example. You said don't change native HTML elements unless you absolutely have to. And my question was, what is an instance where you have to change a native HTML element? Can you iterate on that one again? Because I didn't quite follow.
Sure. I would say like a read more would be a good example. Like, you know, it's you want to tell a client don't use read more, but
Right.
you don't have control over what a client wants to do, and a lot of times they want to use read more links even though they have a title for like a under an image or something for that content. So if they insist on using a read more link that goes to the same content, that would be a good case where there's a lot of different techniques you can use to go to that content with ARIA. But one technique would be to add an ARIA label to that same content. You could also add ARIA label by that connects to that title as well, to the link title. So in that case, it's important to do that because otherwise the screen reader user is just going to see a list of read more over and over again. And that's not going to be helpful because that just doesn't give them context. Visual users are able to look on the page and see, the content and have context of where that read more links belongs. But as a blind user is not going to have any idea where that belongs. So
Yeah,
that's very
I guess
important.
we're kind of spoiled in Drupal that's kind of built in, right? Usually. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And that's what's wonderful about them including so many accessibility improvements in Drupal. Like the skip to main content is such a simple thing, and them including that in their I'm getting a dry throat, but them including that in core is such an important thing because I wish that more people experience what it's like to navigate a site with a screen reader. Hold on a second.
You're fine. Well, I'm a keyboard user, and because I can never find my mouse or whatever, and the trackpad's too high, whatever reason. So that skip to more or skip to main contact, if a website doesn't have that, I almost like I'm done.
Yeah, exactly. And you'd be amazed at the amount of sites that don't have that, and it's very frustrating. So that's a simple thing. There's a lot of simple steps that you can take to make your site accessible. That's how I started with it, is by making small changes to websites like alt text or skip to main content. There's a lot of small things you can do, and just, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So.
Rajab was on YouTube watching us, and he asked, should we use ARIA with email templates?
That's an interesting question. And, I am not a big user of email templates. I'm kind of really a big fan of keeping it simple. But I when I was researching actually links and email links, I did notice that there was some use of it. So if you, since I don't know the actual answer to that, Rajab, if you give me an opportunity, I'll look it up and research it, and I'll get back with you and post the answer to my LinkedIn account for you. It's a great question, though.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like when we like switch venues of how we present our content, we have to think about these rules too, you know. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's we're so used to thinking of a website, but I mean, it's just like how many devices are website, or you got to think of digital and not the web only. So yeah,
Mhm.
it's a great question though. Yeah, thank you.
I don't, oh, we already answered that question. But I don't think we have any more questions. But for the people who are watching the video or watching on YouTube, if you do have questions, remember you can post your questions on social media with the hashtag A11yTalks, and that's Mastodon and Twitter. But also feel free to reach out to Kat on LinkedIn and ask questions, and Kat will look up the answer or tell you the answer as she knows. So.
Okay,
Thanks, Kat.
thank
That
you.
was a lot of fun
Thanks.
because that's a lot to unpack. You know, I'm not a web developer, but I teach accessibility and that, and I never even touch ARIA because it's just, don't use it, use it. You don't use it. You know, there's just
Yeah.
like, yeah. So that I like the way that you presented it in these are the instances and these are the not instances. So that, thanks for helping me learn.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. And you're not dull.
I'm not awesome though either.
You are awesome. Oh wait,
No,
that was a joke. That's an inside joke. Yeah, yeah. You're not
you're fine.
awesome. You're cool.
Yeah, I'm cool. Okay. So coming up in September, we have Nikki Massaro. She's the senior design engineer at Adobe, presenting using controllers for keyboard accessibility. So mark your calendars for September 12th at 1:30 Eastern time. And, you know, we say this every month. We are always looking for speakers and new voices in the accessibility community and beyond. We do some talks on Drupal, but we welcome talks from any technology. And we make a conscious effort to include historically marginalized and unrepresented groups in our tech speaker lineup. So if you're interested, you can reach out to us at team@ALITalks.com. For those with IAAP certifications, ALITalks speakers and attendees receive professional development credit through IAAP for your continuing education. And you can also use these if you're in the medical profession for your continuing education credits. And we'd love your input. Please let us know if you have any ideas or if you want to see a certain talk. We want to make ALITalks more friendly to everybody. So subscribe to our YouTube channel and never miss a talk. You know, that's youtube.com, accessibility talks. Consider, you know, donating and contributing to Ally Talks through our Open Collective page. That's opencollective.com/Ally Talks. And of course, follow us on X, Twitter at Ally Talks, and follow us on Mastodon. And thank you for attending, and we'll see you next month. Thank you.